Hi, so in this video, I'm going to go through a number of typical mistakes that I see or problem areas that people have on their fingerboarding. Now, you've seen from the content that we're producing with fingerboarding and the methods for getting stronger or fitter on them, there's lots of good ways to do things, but I still think there's some really common things that people are either ignoring or making mistakes with, and I want to run you through those today. And these apply, interestingly, to both beginners and relatively advanced climbers as well. So they're being made, not just by 5 people, 20 people, it's hundreds, if not thousands of people that I've come across over the last few years making these common mistakes. So I'm going to do some little kind of examples of what we can do on the fingerboard behind us. I'm going to talk you through what I've learned over the years, and we're going to take 3 key sections that we're going to identify today and see what we can do about them. Okay, so number 1, and this is a big one, is that especially amongst people who have just started to do some kind of fingerboard training, and that is training too fatigued. So typically this is when people ask me a question, they say, could I do my fingerboard session at the end of a power endurance training session, or could I do it after a bouldering session? And my answer 99% of the time is no. This is not an appropriate time to be doing fingerboarding. And you know why? It's because we need to be training at maximal intensity. So we need to be operating right up close to that 100% intensity mark when we're doing our fingerboarding session. And if you're pre-fatigued and you've already been doing some sort of form of training, then you're not going to be hitting that kind of quality, that kind of intensity in the session. So it's really important that you get out of this habit and you start focusing and prioritizing fingerboarding at the beginnings of your session after you're warmed up. So there are a couple of alternative exercises that we can do to the traditional fingerboarding exercise when you're pre-fatigued and tired at the end of the session. And the key here is that we're moving away from stimulating the forearm and we're moving more towards the shoulder and the back, and those muscle groups are going to be worked on this exercise. So I have my fingerboard here behind me, and typically I'd be doing my fingerboard session on this mid-sized 20mm edge for any kind of strength improvements. But instead what I'm going to do is I'm going to move to a big chunky rounded edge. So this is around a 40mm edge, rounded off. It's equivalent to a medium-sized jug, for example. And what I can do is, rather than working the forearm specifically and working at a very high intensity here, because holding onto my this hold here is probably 20-30% of my maximal intensity, I'm going to work much more on the shoulders, and I'm going to do a shoulder engagement exercise. And the first one that I'm going to show you is one where I'm working a lot more on the ability to be able to rotate my shoulder down, so bringing it down and rather than tucked up towards the ear, and I'm bringing it back into a more open-chested position. And I see this a lot with fingerboarding, that when people are doing really hard hangs, they tend to roll and turn in on those hangs and their body rotates underneath. And this is going to really help with not doing that when you're doing your maximal fingerboard exercises, especially on single arms. So what I'm going to do is grab big hold on the top of the rung, and I'm going to place my left hand on this, in this case, on a relatively small hold. It could be on the fingerboard itself, it could be on some micro edges further on. And I'm just going to do a really light, essentially like a campus move, but I'm going to really concentrate on making sure that my shoulders stay open and I'm engaging that shoulder in that exercise. So I'm hanging here, I'm coming up and engaging the shoulder, and I'm coming to match up on the top of the rung. So a small little campus move, it's barely anything. So it's like an active shoulder engagement exercise. I can swap it round onto the other side. So again, rather than turning inwards and twisting my torso, I'm staying much more square on. And from here, coming up to that top edge, I can swap down, staying open, top edge. Staying open, top edge. You can make this a little bit more advanced by dropping the hand, that assistance hand, even lower down. So I might come around to these micros here, hand still on that top edge. I'm not turning in, I'm staying really square on, and I'm coming up. And I'm really working the muscles around the shoulder here, on the back of the shoulder blade, to be able to bring it back and rotate it down. Really good exercise to do. And it's kind of a more advanced version of doing those shoulder shrugs and shoulder engagement exercises that we often do in warm-up during our fingerboard sessions. So really good option that, and I do that a lot at the end of my fingerboard sessions or at the end of climbing sessions when I'm pretty tired and I shouldn't be doing any fingerboarding. Okay, so number 2 in terms of common mistakes that people will make with their fingerboarding is the tendency to use relatively poor body positions or using exactly the same body position when they're doing those hangs 100% of the time, so that they're really overworking certain muscle groups, or they're setting themselves up for potential issues like nerve impingement or fatigue in some of those really small stabilizing muscles that might not be readily conditioned for that particular body position. So first body position, which I'm not that keen on, and I see quite a few people do, especially when they're doing really hard hangs, is they're really rotating their torso forwards and bringing both their chest and their stomach forwards underneath the fingerboard. So when they're doing their hangs here, so I'm going to do a 2-arm hang in this case, is that they're, rather than hanging straight with their torso in this position here, is they're really rotating up and bringing their chest and their stomach forward. 2 issues with that is it's very hard to work maximally on the fingers when you're putting so much stress and strain into the rest of your torso. And secondly, it's quite a strain on the lower back, and this will become a problem if you start doing a lot of heavy weighted hangs. So be really careful with this one. And even at body weight there, I could feel it in my lower back. So I don't really like that particular body position. I much prefer a straighter torso position here, where my hips are directly below my shoulders and I'm not overly exaggerating that forward rotation of my torso. Next issue that I see with the hangs as well is too much unengaged hanging on a fingerboard. So this is where the shoulder is completely relaxed and we have no engagement to the shoulders at all. So example here is that you can see here, this would be my engaged position for a fingerboard hang, 2-armed. This would be my totally disengaged position. So you can see that distance between the shoulder and the ear really drops down, and I'm just hanging on the skeleton in this position here. And a lot of people have asked me, gone, well, why can't I do that? I mean, that's essentially a position that you often find yourself when you're on a route, especially where you're really hanging and resting and really relaxing on the route. And the issue isn't exactly that hang itself. It's more that if you spend a lot of time doing that on your hangs, you tend to suffer from the issue of not being able to engage properly when you need to. So a totally disengaged hang may not be a massive issue in isolated incidences, but it will become an issue if you do it all the time. So there are circumstances when I might do really quite a disengaged hang on my fingerboarding, but it's really, really isolated and nowhere near more than maybe 10% of the time, so it's very, very limited. I tend to really go for that very engaged shoulder position, straight torso, and a gap between my shoulders and my ears. Third issue area that I also have seen a lot over the years with climbers who are doing fingerboarding, and this is very much in the realm of the beginner climber and the advanced climber. So it applies to both of those groups, is too much focus on very open dragged positions on a fingerboard. So what we're talking about here is so that all 3 or 4 fingers are in a very open extended position and we're hanging on the tendons a lot more on the soft tissue structures in the fingers, rather than using a little bit more engagement and using the forearm muscles to be able to close and create that half crimp position. So an example on this on the fingerboard would be a totally open 3-finger drag, a 4-finger drag position. So you can see that I've got my index finger in a drag position and my little finger in a drag position, or 2-finger pocket work. Now, these grip positions, again, like the shoulder positions, they're not a problem. You can very definitely do a certain amount of your fingerboarding in these drag positions. But the problem I see is that when we climb really hard, and especially when terrain gets a little bit steeper and the holes get smaller, we can't rely on these drag positions. We need to close up into either half crimped and crimp or full crimp positions. And the issue with any kind of grip position strength training is that when we're doing that contraction, we have an isometric contraction. So we have a fixed position when we have that grip position. And the transfer of strength in any particular grip position is around 10 to 15 degrees away from that angle. So if we're training here at 90, then we have very low relevance in terms of strength transfer all the way through to that open position, because we've gone from 90 all the way through to close to 180 degrees. So I'm a much bigger fan of doing a variety of grip positions which go from open, half crimped, and at the right times of the year, and this is the really important part, some full crimp grip position training. And when you're going to be doing that, and again I'm going to overly stress this, it's got to be really limited, it's a short time of the year, and it is an advanced form of training. But I think it is appropriate for some individuals in the right circumstances at the right time of the year to be putting some kind of full crimp grip position training into their fingerboarding. Okay, so there you have it. Those are my 3 biggest habits, tips, tricks, problem areas that I see around fingerboarding that the climbing population often does. And this is what I've seen over the last 5-10 years of training and coaching. And I know some of these may seem really simple and you don't think that you would do this, but just really watch your habits and really try and get good at that self-analysis and see whether these things are cropping up a little bit more commonly than you see. Because if you get into the habit of doing any of these 3 commonly in your training, I really think you're opening yourself up to either 1, a little bit more chance of having injury, or 2, plateauing out in terms of the gains that you see from your fingerboarding and not achieving your true potential. What you'll notice on our YouTube channel is we actually have a number of fingerboarding sessions and videos and tips and things like that on the channel. So have a browse around, you'll see there's some already on the channel, there's more coming out as well, related to testing, single arm training, different grip positions. And of course, if you don't want to miss out on any of our content, just click to like and subscribe and you'll see our latest updates each week. Yeah.